You're listening to sermons from La Cañada Congregational Church and Pastor Kyle Sears. Join us in person every Sunday at 10 a.m. in La Cañada for worship. You can find more information about our church online at lacañadachurch.org.
So we were about halfway through our trick-or-treating this past week when all the kids in our group were saying how heavy their bags were, and it was kind of complaint but also celebration because there was still more candy to be had. And so I suggested that I could help make it lighter for them, a Reese's or a Twix, the smaller ones would be fine. And every one of them refused. Every one of them refused. That candy was theirs. They earned that candy, even though I also walked with them, just not up the walk. And I think that they knew that more candy was on the way, but what they had was not enough for them yet. Generosity wasn't required for them because they knew I wasn't starving. I was going to be okay. And I think they also knew that stealing candy from children is not befitting a pastor. And so, they knew they were safe in being stingy. But we really don't grow out of that instinct all that much either. Money, whether we have a little of it or a lot, whispers threats to us. That if you lose me, you lose everything. That more might not be coming on the way. That what you have might not be enough. Don't be a fool to share so freely this once-in-a-lifetime chance to have a big bag of candy. We're going to read a portion of a letter that Paul writes to a relatively wealthy church in a relatively wealthy part of the Roman Empire, and how their commitment to faith changes their relationship to money. This is 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 through 15. So Paul writes to them and says, "We want you to know, brothers and sisters, about the grace of God that has been granted to the churches of Macedonia," a little further away. "For during a severe ordeal of affliction, their abundant joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. For as I can testify, they voluntarily gave according to their means and even beyond their means, begging us earnestly for the generous opportunity of partnering in this ministry to the saints, and not as we expected. Instead, they gave themselves first to the Lord and by the will of God to us, so that we might urge Titus that as he has already made a beginning, he should also complete this generous undertaking among you. Now, as you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in utmost eagerness, and in our love for you, so we want you to excel also in this generous undertaking. I do not say this as a command, but I am, by mentioning the eagerness of others, testing the genuineness of your love. For you know the generous act of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that by his poverty you might become rich. And in this matter, I am giving my opinion. It is beneficial for you who began last year, not only to do something, but even to desire to do something. So finish doing it, so that your eagerness might be matched by completing it according to your means. For if the eagerness is there, the gift is acceptable according to what one has, not according to what one does not have. For I do not mean that there should be relief for others and hardship for you, but it's a question of equality between your present abundance and their need, so that their abundance may also supply your need, in order that there may be equality. As it's written, the one who had much did not have too much, and the one who had little did not have too little." Okay, so talking about money in church, I know, I get it. But according to our very Western sort of mindset, we tend to read all the stuff in Scripture as being about individuals. It's about me, that Paul is talking to me as a person about this. And I think that some of these principles are going to transfer, but I want us to keep in mind that when Paul says you, it might be better translated to more of my heritage as a y'all. This is written to a church where they should be listening to this as a group of people, not as one. And so it's an invitation to group generosity. And part of the reason that Paul is doing that, I think, and one of the reasons it's important for us to understand, especially when it comes to money, is that this is meant to be a safety net for the poorest among us. That the idea is that everybody needs to give $1,000. Well, there may be people among us who can't, but the congregation can certainly support the weight of generosity where others may not be able to. So Paul is a missionary to the Gentile world. And he has a foot firmly placed, though, in the Jewish world as well and in the church in Jerusalem. And so he is writing to a church, again, that is a relatively wealthy part of the Roman Empire on behalf of this oppressed group back in Jerusalem, who is now, because of their oppression and because of the occupation of their land, is relatively poor. The Jerusalem church is made up of Jesus' first followers and their families, who were mostly the poor. And so imagine these new churches that Paul has seen start and begin to flourish, not all of them as wealthy as Corinth, but because Corinth is positioned on a major trade route and on the coast, it was actually one of the trade hubs of the Roman Empire. They could support the needs of people half a world away very easily. And what he's saying is that the poorer Macedonian churches have done just that. It seems that these missionary travelers have made their way, Titus and Paul and others have made their way across the Roman Empire and see these churches starting up. And as they do, and they meet with other Christians on their travels, they mention the need to take a collection. And that their hope is that when they eventually return back to Jerusalem, they can carry some money to help the church there, especially the poor among them. So he's basically saying, y'all do what you can. I'm going to come back through on my way back from all my other visits, and when I do, I'll take up the collection. And what Paul is saying is that somehow the hardships of these Macedonian churches kind of lowered the expectations of the missionaries. You know, every little bit helps, but we understand that, you can't do as much as maybe some of these other churches in Corinth. And so imagine their surprise when these small, poor, newly established churches with newly established Christians embrace the opportunity to be generous. And he says it's like this collision of their extreme poverty and their extreme joy have now come together and created this generous explosion that somehow they scraped together a lot that really went beyond their expectations. And so Paul has a message to the wealthy church in the wealthy church in Corinth, that you need to step it up. That he said, you love your reputation of excellence, and it's well earned in speech and in everything else. You guys are hitting the top of the charts, but you've lagged behind in other ways, stuck in committee meetings or embarrassed to ask others, but I'm coming back. He sent a letter ahead, and I expect that when I get there, there's going to be something to take up. Now, he understands, it's uncouth to talk about money and religion, and they're already doing one, so why make them do both? And I don't like preaching about money. This is actually the first giving sermon I've given here, because normally, the bucket's in the back. Y'all know where it is, and that's enough for me. But I like to just copy Paul's approach here, if you'll indulge me a little bit, because his approach is pretty bold. He continues, it may sound like I'm comparing you to these churches in Macedonia, and that's because I am. Their love overflows in the offering they're giving. He's like, I'm not demanding that you give, but it will tell me a lot about your priorities and about the genuine commitments you have to love and to faith if you do. And if it turns out that, we just never got around to it, and I'm sure I left my wallet somewhere and I don't carry cash on me, then that tells me something too. Basically, what Paul is saying is put your money where your mouth is. Do you care about the poor? Do you care about the mission of the church? Then honor your origins back in Jerusalem, because without them, you got nothing. Now, honestly, my relationship with money and faith, I think really started almost at the same time. 30 years ago, almost to the day, it was last week, but 30 years ago to the day, an anonymous donor in the church that I had just started going to, again, many of y'all know, my family didn't go to church. My twin brother and I were invited. We start rolling in on Sunday school and Sunday morning worship, and the next thing you know, we're there all the time. The youth group had planned a ski trip and had been doing fundraisers throughout the year to help raise money for that. Because we were lagged behind, we weren't going to be able to afford to be able to go. Single mom, 5 boys, not going to happen. So an anonymous donor gave enough money for me and my brother to go. Donated all the supplies we needed, everything. And through that ski trip, I made connections with the other kids in the youth group as well as the adult chaperones that went. And it was like a brand new family was born. I felt welcomed and engaged. And anytime the doors were open, I was there. from that experience, I later experienced a call to ministry. And that's why I'm here today, 30 years later. I did the math to figure out what would that $500, if it was moderately invested 30 years ago, it would be about $5,000 right now. And I wonder, does the person who gave that anonymously think, I could have $5,000 right now if I would have just not given it? Or would they say that the money that they gave was worth it? I hope that they would rather have the ministry that money has invested in rather than $5,000 sitting in the bank account. Now, I think a lot of church sermons, especially if you hear church sermons about money, kind of turn up the heat pretty fast, trying to get you to make some sort of commitment before you walk out the door. You don't need to pray about it. You don't need to think about it. Just write down right now how much money you want to give before you leave. That's not what Paul is doing here. Because I think eventually you're like, what did I just sign? What did I just say? There's no way I can do that. Paul is saying, listen, I'm going to come back through Corinth. And so you got some time to talk about it, to think about it, to do some math. And in fact, that's what he wants them to do. Crunch the numbers, see what you can do, but make sure as you're calculating what you can afford, that you also calculate some faith into it. Consider your giving, he says, as an investment in the lives of people that you will probably never know back in Jerusalem. But you are bound to them in faith, that they are both your forebearers and siblings in this burgeoning relationship between Christ and the church. He says, you know your Bible stories. Jesus becomes our example, becoming poor so that the poor might be rich. And he's not talking poor in spirit or the forgotten. It's money talk. It's not symbolic at this point or spiritual poverty. Jesus left streets of gold for the dirt of Nazareth and stuck around for 33 years. It feels a little different than saying, well, I guess I maybe not get Starbucks on Friday. There's a little more to the calling here of how we might embrace our generosity. What wealth would we risk if it meant that others could find it? 4 years ago, our church received a letter from the trust of a person who had recently passed away, informing us of a bequest of $1.6 million, anonymously, by the way. It basically doubled our investment account. And part of that, request was like, I don't want people knowing who this was. Just a few months after we got that letter and the money landed in our account, we had a global pandemic that shut the world down for a couple of years. And we didn't have to lay off any staff or sacrifice any meaningful ministry. We were able to open back up and keep things going, I would argue, better than ever. We ended up during that time renovating the parsonage. This past year, repaired our upper parking lot, fixed the preschool roof, installed a new sound system, fixed some lights, started new ministries that allowed us to reach out to others and bring the blessings that many of us have received in this congregation to those who may never cross the threshold of that door, and yet they still found the benefits and blessings of God. I love the idea that everybody's offering, it all goes into this pot anonymously. We have that one big anonymous donor, but every Sunday, if you leave money back there, no one else knows how much you're given. I don't know how much you're given, but all of us give so that all of us then are engaged in the blessings that the church partakes in. Every little sliver of your check goes to, keep some lights on, but also to go feed the poor. Or to give a movie night to families so that they might come together and be connected better in our community. Or help kids learn how to make lunches for the homeless each and every week. Most of the money that we give goes to benefit those who we will never see, who are not here right now. We have people who join us at some of these events that we've been doing over the past year or so who will not come to church on Sunday, don't intend to. They actually find themselves surprised that they are on this campus at all. that they're sitting across the table from a pastor and enjoying themselves and writing emails saying, I look forward to the next time, and they have to stop themselves. It's like, what have I just said? Paul has this interesting line here. I want you to give generously. It would be even better if you had the eagerness to do it, but I'm going to take what I can get. Whether you want to or not, you ought to. I hope you have the want to, but at very basic, you got the ought to. The best approach that we can have is that we want to serve our neighbors, that we want to care for the poor and reach out to those that we may never even know, that we might see the generosity of a blessing come and echo across it, where $500 given 30 years ago is now bringing people, hopefully, hope and meaning in ways that could not be imagined with such giftedness. But if eagerness doesn't work, Paul says, shame might. And so you sense a little bit of the razor blade in his words here, right? It's cutting. But what he says, and there's a promise here that I want us to understand, that we can train our hearts toward generosity. We can train ourselves toward eagerness in giving. We can learn that when someone says, can I have a Twix, that we give them all of the Twix we have, knowing that we still have an abundant bag of candy still. He says, if the eagerness is there, you will see all that you have rather than all that you don't. If the eagerness is there, you will see all that you have to give rather than all that you don't have to give. You'll recognize all the ways that it is possible rather than all of the reasons why you shouldn't. You'll see abundance rather than scarcity, and that evolves into not just how you write your check, but how you live your life. You see all the health you have rather than the illness that you have. You see the friends you have rather than the loss that you have. You see the hope you have rather than the despair. You see the love you have rather than the isolation. There are ways that we then position ourselves in this world that actually invites us to see how God's blessings are overflowing from heaven rather than the bit that we didn't get that we wish we had. I think what Paul is saying is that you're going to find you didn't really miss that money much anyway. That $500, that $5,000, it was worth the gift. When you give life and joy to others through your generosity, it repositions how we see ourselves in the world. It repositions what we would define as an investment. It's not just about the percent on the Fed and the blah, blah, blah. It's about the lives that are changed because of the gift. Now, Paul makes it clear he is not asking them to break the bank or to do something that will ensure their doom. But he does say that having too much is just as bad as not having enough. That having too much corrupts us. That money quickly possesses us, like that bag of candy. That I've got enough now, but will I have enough tomorrow? The next house, the next street, at some point I'm gonna run out, and so I can't share a thing because what I have now could get more if I'm just a little more tenacious on the knocking of that door, right? And so we scuttle away our possessions for a rainy day, this future doom that's coming the next time the Fed meets, or the next time the pandemic hits, or the next time that blah, 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 and we never recognize our capacity to bless people now. And Paul says that if we give generously, then those who receive it, because we choose to meet their needs, that somehow they will then meet our needs. Now, what needs do the Corinthians have? Jerusalem's not going to send them a check. But Paul is saying that your gift into the world to help those in need will somehow come back to you, not through monetary blessings. Don't get me wrong. The pastors that promise, like, you give a little bit and God is going to give you a lot more, no. No, that is not embodied by Jesus, right? He was poor when he was born and he was poor when he died. But there was something else that Paul is going to say is worth more than gold and silver. And that in blessing others, what we find is that we ourselves are doubly blessed. because our hearts have changed. We've been transformed. We are no longer walk this earth like most people do. When I was called as a pastor here 7 years ago, there was one overwhelming need expressed to me by everyone I talked to. We need younger families, more diversity. We're an old white church that faces this uncertain future. All that we need is beyond these doors, if we're willing to be generous with all that we have, even risk losing it. To me, that's the power of the gospel, that we would lay down all that we have so that others might discover all that we have. So my request is like Paul's, that there's much more for us to do. As a church, I want us to continue to make a commitment to continue in our generosity that benefits us last, not first. But as individuals, I want us to see the part that we play. Next year, this sanctuary turns a century old, 100 years next year. In digging through our history, what we found out is that when this building was built, we had about the same number of congregation members as we do right now. They invested what would amount to be about $2 million to build this thing. Some of these, this window here was donated by the craftsmen who built the place because they thought it was so beautiful, like that we got to put our fingerprint on it more than just the beams we put up. Back then, Sunday mornings was probably the first experience for people. Go check out a church, come in on Sunday at 10, we'll figure out what this is like. And so they invested heavily in this place to be this gathering point for everyone else. But that's not the way it is today. Actually, Sunday morning is probably the last place that people will come. They're going to come to a concert maybe, they'll come to movies in the park, they'll come to some weird chili cook-off thing, and Sunday is like the last thing. They want to fill out the pastor and everyone else. How weird are they? And so we invest our treasures into the places where they are, not in here, but out there. And over time, it makes a difference. And so I think a lot of you, if you're a member of this church or you've been coming a lot, got a letter from me this week. Everyone go like this if you did. Hopefully you read that letter, yes. That says what I want to do is sit down with each of you one-on-one or as families or little couples, whatever it is, and talk to you about what next year holds for us and how you can participate in this generosity, this movement of generosity that we can have as a congregation. Not only to celebrate the history of how far we have come, but also to see into the future of how the little gifts that are given now can have big dividends later on. And who knows what kind of blessings of the people that are not here now that might carry on 20, 30, 40 years into the future. My hope is that we would be a people who see all that God has given us rather than all that we don't have, and all the potential that God has bestowed upon us, that we could dig deep and see how we have been so blessed in our life of faith and in the life of this congregation that we would discover how we might bless others. So think about it. Reach out to me. We'll set up a time to talk. And I want us to see that in this, all that we do is just a drop compared to all that God has done for us. Amen.